Hello everyone, today I'm looking at Deltarune, parts 1 to 4. This is the first half of the Deltarune experience. I mean, you could say it's one game, but it's really kind of multiple games, multiple chapters. And I thought, I've kind of met the halfway point now. I don't really have anything in my backlog because I cleared it. And now it's just really thinking about the first half of this journey that we're on with Toby Fox's next foray into the gaming world. It's funny, the first chapter of Deltarune actually released for free back in 2018, which is roughly 3 years after he finished Undertale, and it became a huge success. And I think just right off the bat, I think I will say this out the gates, that maybe shockingly or not shockingly, I feel that Deltarune is not going to live up to Undertale. And in a lot of ways, after playing, the original Earthbound and the Mother series, I actually have an increased reputation, or increased appreciation rather, for Undertale, because it was so holistic in appropriating a lot of old themes from those previous games and just introducing it in such a well-formatted, short, concise, brief manner. And it kind of feels like Deltarune, again, these are all chapters, they're not full games. And so they kind of add in new elements, like here's a new character, here's a new mechanic. There's lots of mechanics, which is great, but nothing ever feels like it's concluding or moving towards a conclusion until really the end of chapter 4. Because it's broken up, these feel like a series of almost mini games or mini experiences rather than an actual, again, holistic experience. That being said, there are, definitely good things. This is definitely Toby Fox. It is definitely like a great work of his. But it just feels like it's not going anywhere, because that's kind of the point. It's not supposed to be going anywhere really yet. It's not until the second half. So I'm kind of, I question the entire structure of a tiered storytelling structure. I mean, to do it in chapters is kind of similar to a TV show, which again, I just don't feel suits this medium that well. But that's what he's decided to do. There are some funny quirks. For example, I would say of the first 4, the quirkiest one, and I would say honestly the weakest one, is probably chapter 3, because it's a complete side quest. It is not contingent or related to anything else in the first 3 chapters, and the first 4 chapters whatsoever. You kind of have this TV episode where you meet this like embodied TV guy called Tenna, and he gives you kind of a series of game shows. And so there's like, oh, this is Metatron or whatever from the first game, where he just kind of was like this TV stylish kind of character guy. And that whole chapter, while it's kind of entertaining, like there's a bunch of mini games, a bunch of game shows, like it just has no bearing on the story. So it's kind of like a fun chapter for sure, but I don't know. I guess it could have been more fun, I suppose. I don't know. One thing that I do have to say though is the actual basic battle system is still, it's the same, but it's much more improved. It's much better. Now you have this edge mechanic where if your heart just misses by a few pixels a certain projectile, what'll happen is it'll kind of do a tick, and it'll count towards your TP, which is how you do all your magic attacks and special attacks and whatever. And a lot of bosses have not exactly scripted, but pre-scripted certain ways to beat them, and so you just have to basically dodge until you get the one mechanic that beats them. And so I guess that's another criticism I'd have of Deltarune so far, is also the pacing, but also the fact that there's far less gameplay in this game in a way. I mean, there are a lot of new mechanics, like there's this like one piano thing, and there's these game shows, and they kind of show up and you never really ever get good at them. They're kind of there only for as long as you do kind of entertain you. So they kind of resemble WarioWare mini games rather than something that kind of builds on and on. The one exception to this, I would say, is actually in chapter 4. There's this whole kind of wall climbing mechanic that he introduces that actually gets evolved quite a bit through that chapter. So you start off climbing the wall, and then you jump to another wall, and then they introduce obstacles, and then introduce like a timed thing you have to race. And so that like makes sense. That like builds over the course of the chapter, and it feels really good. I think actually a great addition was the fact that they had this kind of piano puzzle, mini game where there's one piano where you have to play it and just do the notes, and there's another one where the direction you press will actually move a block in the environment. And he evolved that really interestingly, where in the last part of that chapter, the piano is actually moving, and you're actually using that to navigate, and you're doing these hyper fast puzzles of navigating around the environment. Which is one of these things where it'll go in one direction, but it'll never stop. So I have to like go to the corner, the other corner, etc. So that's smart. But there's just in general, there's a lot more storytelling and a lot more dialogue in these games, to the point where I would say that around 15% of the game is actually the normal battle system. Another 10% or 15% is maybe these funny, mini games or puzzles. And the other 60% of the game, or 70% of the game, is just dialogue, which, again, isn't bad, but it kind of gets away from this feeling that you're in a set amount of rules, and then the aberrations to those rules are the funny component, or they're the interesting component. Because once you establish a standard, then you can kind of deviate from that. But if you don't have a standard and all you have is deviation, like, okay, this mini game, this dialogue, this character, this random thing that's happening, if it's too all over the place, it kind of loses its grip. It kind of loses its identity. And so I feel that it's just getting kind of too spectacle and not enough substance. Like, they're cool, there's a lot of stuff going on, but what does it actually mean? And because of course Toby doesn't have the full story finished or written or done yet, we're not really building towards anything. We kind of have clues and mysteries and obfuscations, which is fine, but if we don't feel that it's building towards anything, or it's going to be just completely scrapped later on because you messed the idea, then it kind of feels like a chore, honestly. I'm really talking about chapter 3 here. It was just kind of a chore to finish that, because it was, okay, all this random crazy stuff, and like, okay, we have a room that we stay, and then we go to the next one, but even that is so short-lived that it just felt like I was like watching a show, or doing it was a chore to go through this whole thing, because I knew I wasn't really going to be tested either. And so that is one kind of positive backhanded thing I'd say about it, is that all these new challenges, because I know that the next boss, the next encounter, is going to have a very specific mechanic, that if it failed you at any of these points and it acted like a normal game and sent you back to the previous checkpoint, you would lose it would feel like an hour of dialogue and progress just to fail to a stupid mechanic. So fortunately he doesn't do that, and he makes these encounters very kind of predictable, easy. I don't know how many fail safes and safeguards and rails there are, but I never really felt, rarely, sometimes besides the bosses, I never really felt that I was actually in danger of failing the game and going back, and that it was entirely just a kind of sensory experience, which is fine. But anyway, that's kind of the main drawbacks. I want to talk about the things I did actually like about the game. So I think the characters, the cast, are really great. What's interesting, again, I talked about mystery a little bit. The main character of this game is Chris, and it's really interesting when you start the game. It says, okay, choose your body, like you customize your character, choose your name, and I love this because it really does subvert you, where it's like, okay, I made a custom character, and the game basically says, no, you didn't. There is no custom character. You were playing as Chris, and it's like, oh, okay, that's kind of crazy / weird that you made this expectation. And so as you play as Chris, what's interesting is like, Chris never talks. So it's a silent protagonist, which I, kind of applaud Toby for doing. It's kind of a rare thing to do it in the modern day. And so it's very old school. And so I appreciate that. What's interesting about Chris, though, is that Chris is kind of without the F. It's an anagram for Frisk from the first game. But this Chris wears the green and yellowish sweater, which was only worn by Chara, which was the genocide route ending, which, by the way, I never actually beat because I could not beat Sans. I mean, I could beat Sans. I kind of sat down and realized, okay, I probably could get good at this, and it would take me a week to beat this thing, but I didn't care enough to do that. So I never beat genocide route because I wasn't interested. But anyway, there's this implicit thing that you're controlling Chris, and Chris never speaks, but Chris is also, it resembles the evil character. And so there's this cool, this is the coolest thing about Deltarune. There is a meta narrative going around over control and the perception or projection of the character into the game. Because there's certain parts where you control the heart, and then Chris moves independently from you and becomes kind of evil. So I really enjoy how Toby is messing around with that, because it's always a very cool mechanic that is kind of used in other games like Nier, and more from a narrative standpoint. One Shot also uses this a little bit. I just love this mechanic because it's the visual metaphor that acts as the commentary directly without having to explain it. It's really cool. Beside that, you also have Susie and Ralsei, and very just overall very well-rounded characters, great characters. Susie is kind of this purple dinosaur girl who essentially is very tomboy / bully. She's very confrontational, standoffish, and she kind of eventually warms up to the main character, to Chris and the rest of them, by kind of opening up, because she's had a hard life. She's not trauma, but she basically learns how to open herself up and open up her heart and all that stuff. So she's a fun character. I like her because she does have development, which is great. And then you also have Browse, who is kind of this character from the Dark World, who is he's a good boy. He's just a very good boy who seems like he is dealing with a lot of baggage and a lot of trauma, and he just wants to be nice to people because he's obviously been through something, and you get allusions to it here and there, but it's never fully explained. But he's a very nice character. He's a very cute character. They even, I don't know how I feel about this, but in chapter 3 they had this running joke that he kept getting turned into a plushie, and it's kind of like in-game product placement, which was like, okay, it's kind of funny, kind of scummy, but whatever. I mean, you're going with the vibe, right? But yeah, no, I think it's a good cast of characters. And so just, riffing off how it shifted from Undertale, because it's interesting how it's a sequel-ish. It's not exactly established if it has in fact taken place after Undertale. It very much heavily implies that, because now you have humans and monsters all living together, except, Chris is the only human for some reason, I think. And so it's kind of this scenario where it's like, okay, it's after Undertale, all the old characters from the old game are now in the real world, and then all have jobs, and Dean's a police officer, Alphys is a librarian, and they all seem to have memories of, the previous, adventure. So it's like, okay, they know Chris and everything, and Toriel's there. And then there's this weird shift where Asgore and Toriel, got divorced or something. There's something about Asgore and what he did, that he got obsessed with something, and she left him. And now she's hanging out and dancing with Sans. It's kind of funny, but it's also kind of weird. Okay, you didn't have to you didn't have to do this. It was kind of a weird choice, I guess. But anyway, and of course there's Lancer, who's part of the new main cast, who is he's a fun character. He's just of the essence. He's just a goofy guy. And again, I think its roots in the Mother series really show here, because the characters and the writing, of course, is just, I don't know how to say it. It's of an essence, where a certain character will have a certain nature, a certain style, a certain talking way about them that isn't necessarily logical. It doesn't necessarily fit into any stereotype or any category. It's just the essence of that person, and through the eyes of a mother, she just kind of has to accept it. And then the more, I would say, advanced people who played Mother understand that it actually is a very spiritual game, because it's this whole concept around the essence of a person. And the essence of a person sometimes is so unexplainable. The only thing you can point to is that, well, it's not from here. It's a divine alien essence. And that's what Earthbound and Mother is all about. And so, yeah, I mean, the writing in this game is I mean, it's great. I mean, there is a lot of it. Like I said, it feels almost more like a visual novel now, but the writing is good for the most part. Again, sometimes it'll get bogged down and kind of repetitive, but like it's always worth it for those moments where they have some in-game humor about, this is like a statue and this is a slightly more robust and, good-looking statue and all that kind of stuff. So I think it still kind of is there, but it's just kind of a bit, I would say the word for Deltarune is underwhelming. Undertale was such a tightly choreographed, coordinated thing that Deltarune feels like the dragged out Netflix version of this genre. It's kind of just going through a bunch of scenarios and whatever that are interesting, but not exactly iconic or captivating. It's kind of like these are all of Toby's old ideas that he wanted to create and finally has the opportunity to do so. And it's fine, it's good, it's kind of experimental, but it doesn't really glue together at the end. And of course that's implied in the whole chapterized version of the game. I mean, I probably won't really even like this experience until the very last chapter, when you realize, okay, we have to, you can have all the scenarios you want, but until you drive home meaning and the ultimate purpose of the main message you want to derive from this work, it's going to be in the ending. So we just have to wait for that, I guess. Something else that's interesting is about Deltarune, and something else that just, I mean, the thing Deltarune, Delta is a triangle, rune is a rune. It's very like Zelda, right? And there are other inspirations that you kind of pick and choose throughout the game. For example, I personally like it where they'll go into certain areas and they'll like hop onto a platform or onto a wall, but the hop animation, they turn into a ball, like legitimately out of Sonic. Like that is the exact same thing. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, I love those games. I love that energy. Absolutely. I would say, again, like a lot of the boss animations are very flashy, very cool. I felt like chapter 3 or actually chapter 4, they have this like Halloween pumpkin come out, and it almost feels like it's an in-game YouTube poop where he basically screams at you, you're taking too long. And then like it keeps evolving to you're long, and then your like avatar actually becomes long. It's like a maze thing where you have to like run away from it in a maze. And so when you're long, you actually can only go through certain things. So it has a gameplay thing. And then he says, no, you're tutu. And then you like there's a tutu in the game in the maze that you have to pick up and escape with. So and even in that exact same thing, actually now that I think about it, in that exact same chapter, there is this character in the dark who says, you dare bring light to my lair. Like it's very YouTube poop coded, that one. And there's always a fine line that every creator has to run between referencing something and completely being like ripping it off. So I think it does well in that sense, but it's very obviously this is just YouTube poop inspired mini games, which are fun, but it's kind of very obvious. Okay, he's definitely pulling from that. Even when you are fighting that pumpkin boss and you're lighting him up in the final kind of mechanic of that fight, he like screams "Mamma Mia!" So even there, it's like, okay, I know that exactly what this is trying to emulate, which is, I think, pretty interesting. I mean, who's to say if he wanted to have the actual Mario face and he had this idea for so long and then he just like rendered it as a pumpkin. So yeah, there are definitely moments throughout the series that are somewhat iconic that people are still kind of worth talking about. But by the time I got to the end of chapter 4, I was kind of shocked that it wasn't more than what people were talking about it as. I feel like the fan base for this is very niche and very dedicated and very, in tune with, this series. But I was kind of almost let down that, of course, it was going to be overhyped and overtalked, because there really is nothing like this. And that is one good thing about Deltarune. It's very wholesome. It's very nice. It's very sweet. It's very almost family oriented in a lot of ways, which is like I feel Toby channels a lot of not just Earthbound, but Nintendo energy in general. And Nintendo has always kind of been the family friendly game console, environment or people, and I mean, I appreciate that. I appreciate that aesthetic, that style. And so for all of my miscomings, or I think shortcomings of this game, I still really do appreciate it for what it is. And yeah, I've nothing more to say, except I really hope to see what the second half of the game looks like. Again, I think just before I go, we talked about iconic moments. There definitely is the pumpkin part. There is also this one section where Tenna sits down with the cast, and he makes them do like a live stream video game. So it's really weird that you're playing a game in a square in a game, and they're all having commentary, and that's actually really funny. And then you have like certain mechanics where Susie will like swap your controllers, and she'll like say, "Oh, I'm gonna punch this character," and like, "Oh yeah, that's what I would say," or "That's what someone else would say." That's a very natural reaction. I love the chemistry between Susie and Rouse, because Rouse's very nice, very whatever, but until Susie does something like truly inappropriate, then Rouse will get angry, and it's very cute. It's a great cast. There's also, of course, Noelle and Beardley, who they show up in certain parts and certain segments of the game. They're kind of main cast characters, but only reserved for like special episodes or special times, I would say. And they're very nice. I think Beardley really grew on me. He's kind of this know-it-all nerd that is so kind of obnoxious about the right way to play something and the right way to do something, and he always has these references. It's like I just could tell, I could feel that Toby like knew someone like this in real life. And he's supposed to be kind of this obnoxious character, but then when the chips are down and they actually need his help, he actually pulls through and says, "Oh, well, I told you I would be prepared for just such an occasion." So he's actually a pretty fun character. Noelle is super sweet. I love her character as well. And then she kind of has an edgy side to her as well, where she's like, "Oh yeah, no, like I did this goth makeup thing for my band once, and she has a saved game of like a Pokemon like thing where like a bunch of decapitated cats spawned as it glitched." So she definitely has this more nerdy, more alt side of her that obviously her mother does not accept, and her mother's a total control freak. And that's another thing I do appreciate about this game. It does do parent characters, I would say. But I mean, the fact it even does them in general is kind of rare, and I think it does them fine. It does them well, and it makes more interesting dynamics to the game. Also, there's an episode where you go to church, and it's not super serious, and it's not super mocking either. It hits a nice in between of like, oh right, this is what it's like going to church. It's kind of awkward, kind of lame, but kind of nice and cozy as well. And you get to see certain characters in a way that you never would either. Like Caddy Katamheimer reading, doing the reading was I think like very appropriately funny. Sometimes you just get the absolute worst person in the congregation to do a reading. Just like, it's funny, it's kind of realistic, and I love how they've stayed consistent. A lot of the characters stay consistent. Even Sans, there's one where like he's great. There's one where he's standing outside this restaurant that he called Sans, and you go up to him and he says, "Oh, it's closed," and he asks, "Oh no, sorry," you ask, "Is it open?" He's like, "Read the sign, buddy." And you go to the sign and it says open. And so you go back and you tell them, "Well, it says open." It's like, "Well, we're not really open." And you have this back and forth until the sign changes to closed and then clopen, and then it just changes to his face. It's like legit. It's like, Toby still has it. Legitimately really great, funny stuff. And I think it also hits a good balance usually with the medium of the main story, the fate of the characters. There's a prophecy, there's a dark undertone to Chris's true identity, if it's really genocide Chris or not. And it's actually what is the mystery of Deltarune. And I feel like, again, the only issue with it going on for so long in an episodic series is that it might over-explain things or re-explain things. Or, like, for example, one thing that I felt some friction against is the whole kind of backstory about Tenna. Tenna's character basically is just like it's basically Toy Story. He's a TV that they used to sit around and watch, and then they don't watch him anymore, and now he's sad and lonely. So that kind of very, I don't know, blunt metaphoricalism, I'm not super impressed by it. Like, it's a little cringe. It's a little like poor writing. Like, oh, everything in the game is a metaphor for trauma, or I had this literal experience as a real person in my childhood, and I'm putting it in the game now. Like, I always hate that stuff. I hate that. Like, there's one game I was playing where it opened up saying, oh, this game is based off real experiences that we had in this country while traveling. It's like, I don't care. Every single story based on a real story is awful because it's too close to reality. It's too simple. It's not abstract enough. And obviously, Undertale and Deltarune is a very abstract medium. Yeah. And again, there's a few other plot points that I feel might get lost, like, along the way. Like, at the end of chapter 4, there's this one plot point where there's this mystery, no spoilers, there's this mystery at this bunker at the south of town that they're trying to get the passcode to get into. And, like, I just know between now and a year later from when episode 5 releases, I'm probably just not going to remember that. I'll be honest. I mean, I probably will once I start playing it, maybe. But I just feel that there's too many details that are, like, important-ish, but I just feel like people will forget between each episode. Anyway, so I like Deltarune. I just don't love it like Undertale. I didn't realize even how much I actually loved Undertale. Like, as it's a great experience, and I encourage people to go play because it's short, it's sweet, and the music is great. And of course, one thing I do have to say, Deltarune's music is still fantastic. Is it as good as Undertale? Well, we'll have to wait until and see when it's done. There's definitely some good tracks and other tracks that are serviceable, but yeah, if anything, the music is always going to be great from this series. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much it. All I gotta say for this one, and I'll see you later. Bye.